The Cannabis Act represents a new approach to cannabis, one that puts public health and safety at the forefront and will better protect young Canadians. The current approach to cannabis does not work. It has allowed criminals and organized crime to profit while also failing to keep cannabis out of the hands of Canadian youth. In many cases, it is easier for our kids to buy cannabis than cigarettes. Canadians continue to use cannabis at some of the highest rates in the world. It is the most commonly used illicit drug among young Canadians. In 2015, 21% of youth aged 15 to 19 reported using cannabis in the past year. That's 1 in every 5 young people in this country. Too many of our youth see cannabis as a benign substance. They are often ill-informed on the harm that it can do and are unaware that early usage increases susceptibility to long-term effects on cannabis. Youth are especially vulnerable to the effects of cannabis on brain development and function. This is because the THC in cannabis affects the same biological system in the brain that directs brain development. At the same time, too many young people today are entering the criminal justice system for possessing small amounts of cannabis, potentially impacting their long-term opportunities. Clearly, there has to be a better way of educating and protecting our youth. Given these facts, I would like to focus my comments today on the benefits of this legislation for youth. This is one of our government's primary objectives of Bill C-45 to protect youth by restricting their access to cannabis. I would begin by noting that this legislation is just one piece of the overall approach to addressing cannabis use by youth. Our government's commitment to keep cannabis out of the hands of children is made up by a number of complementary measures aimed at safeguarding their health, safety, and well-being. Specifically, our government is trying to reduce cannabis use by youth, to restrict their ability to obtain the product, to provide them with better information on its health harms and risks, and to keep them out of the hands of criminal justice system for possessing even small amounts of cannabis. This approach requires legislative and regulatory measures and support for public education and awareness. To this end, our government has begun a public education campaign with a focus on youth and their parents to better inform them about cannabis and its health, harm, and risks. I am confident that our government's overall approach will be effective in better protecting our youth from potential harm of this substance. I would now like to explain the specific measures in the Cannabis Act that will help safeguard our youth. As a society, we have learned from our health and safety controls that have been put in place for potentially harmful substances such as tobacco, alcohol, and prescription medications. Bill C-45 uses these best practices as its starting point and contains a number of measures that are designed to protect youth. At the outset of Bill C-45 prohibits the sale of cannabis to anyone under the age of 18 and prohibits adults from giving cannabis to anyone under 18. It also creates an offense and penalty for anyone caught using a young person to commit a cannabis-related offense. Any adult caught engaged in these activities would face a jail term of up to 14 years. To avoid the kind of enticements to use cannabis that we have seen in the past with tobacco, Bill C-45 would prohibit any form of cannabis designed to appeal to youth. This means that things like cannabis-infused gummy bears or lollipops would be illegal. To further protect youth from the encouragement to use cannabis, cannabis producers or retailers would be prohibited from using any kind of packaging or labeling that might be appealing to youth, or to use any kind of endorsement, lifestyle promotion, or cartoon animal to promote their product. The promotion or advertising of cannabis products would not be prohibited in any place or in any media that could be accessed by youth, such as a grocery store, movie theaters, or in public transportation, just to name a few examples. To To further reduce the chance that youth might be able to access the product illegally, cannabis will not be sold in any kind of vending machines. Bill C-45 also includes authority to make regulations that could require cannabis to be sold in a child-resistant packaging to protect our youngest ones from accidentally consuming the product. Taken together, these measures constitute a comprehensive approach to protecting the health and safety of our youth. In addition to protecting public health and safety, one of our government goals is to avoid criminalizing Canadians for relatively minor offenses. Having a criminal record or simple possession of small amounts of cannabis can have significant consequences. Opportunities for employment, housing, volunteerism, travel, all of these can be impacted by the existence of a record. The question is, do we want to continue to saddle Canadians with these burdens for the possession of small amounts of cannabis? Our government answer is no. The proposed legislation sets out 30-gram possession limit for dried cannabis in public for adults aged 18 and over. And as I stated earlier, it also establishes offenses and strict penalties for adults who give or try to sell cannabis to youth, or who use a young person to commit a cannabis-related offense. Bill C-45 takes a different approach to cannabis possession by youth, one that recognizes that in some circumstances, entering the criminal justice system can do more harm than good. Under Bill C-45, youth would not face criminal prosecution for possessing or sharing very small amounts of cannabis. Any activities by youth involving more than the small amounts of cannabis defined as over 5 grams would be addressed under the provisions of the Youth Criminal Justice Act. Our government will be working with provinces and territories to support the development of legislation in each jurisdiction that would allow law enforcement to confiscate any amount of cannabis found in the possession of a young person. This would allow authorities to take away any amount of cannabis that they may have in their possession. Let me be clear. The proposed approach to addressing youth possession of cannabis does not mean that such behavior is encouraged or acceptable. It is not. Rather, it recognizes that more balanced approach that uses a range of tools which does not rely only on the criminal justice system will provide a better way to reduce cannabis consumption among youth. This approach is consistent with the findings of the Task Force on Cannabis Legislation and Regulation led by the Honourable Anna McLennan. The task force final report noted that cannabis use among youth could be better addressed through non-criminal approaches that discourage youth from possessing or consuming cannabis. I believe that this strikes the right balance between avoiding criminalizing youth for possession of small amounts and ensuring that cannabis remains tightly regulated and controlled. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, our government has put health, safety, and the well-being of youth at its core of this proposed legislation, and I am confident that through this balanced approach, we will see less high-risk cannabis use by youth, and we will begin to bring down the rate at which our youth use cannabis. Thank you, Mr.